Today, we examine the potent astrological influences surrounding the partial solar eclipse in Virgo and the significance of Virgo's domains, work, health, and well-being. A powerful grand trine signals imminent transformation, technological disruption, evolving workplace paradigms, and shifts in healthcare systems. The eclipse and its planetary aspects represent a cosmic reset, sudden changes, new beginnings, and the revelation of hidden truths, urging individuals and institutions to adapt to rapid developments in AI, automation, and the collective mindset. Hey there, Truth Seeker. Welcome to the Star Kittens community where we discuss 13-sign astrology. Are you in alignment with your divine design? Do you want to master the metaphysical reality? Open the doors of perception. Each planetary body is an archetype, a template, if you will, that helps us interpret human behavior and the world around us. The more awake and aware we are, the more synchronicity will show up in your life. Our focus today is the partial solar eclipse in Virgo, conjunct Mercury, its challenging opposition to Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, and the momentous grand trine involving Pluto and Uranus that signals the calm before the storm. To help us reach more souls with this important message, please like, share, and subscribe. There is a lot going on, so let's jump in. Kia ora, David.
Kia ora.
It is a blustery spring day here. Lots of beautiful pollen in the air that are messing up with my sinuses, my well-being, as I mentioned before. But I am excited to talk about this subject today. It is close to my heart. And of course, I am a Virgo sun, and we're going to talk about Virgo energy today. Exciting. What is the overview?
So health, work, and well-being are the domains of Virgo as we interpret the astrological mosaic. So this is about our relationship with our bodies, our mindset to employment, and our work-life balance or our attitude toward that. Mercury's presence at this new moon brings to mind mental processes, critical thinking, data collection, the faculty of left brain analysis, communication channels, and the processes and protocols involved with that. Beliefs, mental constructs, and ideas are all mercurial energy. Of course, Mercury being conjunct to the new moon and the partial solar eclipse. So all of that is in the context, as we said, of health, work, and well-being. Excuse me. A partial solar eclipse signals sudden change and a cosmic reset. Amplifying these energies are a grand trine involving the disruptor Uranus and Taurus, the transformative power of Pluto and Capricorn, which speaks directly to leadership. And how do we deal with the concept of power comes up when we're dealing with the Pluto archetype. The Mercury mindset that I touched on before, in terms of this trine with Pluto and Capricorn, is how do we think about power? How do we engage with it? How do we deal with it mentally? The opposition to Saturn talks about institutions and governance structures within the context of healthcare, workplace practices, rules of employment, occupational safety and health, those sorts of things. Saturn is also conjunct to Neptune, which is opposite to this new moon. So Neptune's influence here, conjunct Saturn, warns us about delusion, deception, denial, and blind spots in respect of the domains of Virgo, which are health, work, and well-being. The Virgo Mercury energy is asking us or presenting to us the opportunity to analyze healthcare, workplace practices, rules of employment. However, Neptune's influence here almost guarantees that this process is going to be cloudy, fuzzy, and difficult, and it will be hard to isolate the root causes of dysfunction within those domains of health, work, and well-being. It will be difficult to map the dysfunction. It will be difficult to quantify the effects of the delusion, the deception, the denial, the blind spots that we have individually and collectively about the domains of Virgo, being work, health, and well-being. Pisces, the sign sitting opposite, which contains that Saturn-Neptune conjunction, Pisces is the sign of dissolution and emergence. So what that suggests or implies to me in interpretation is that Saturn's energy and institutions with respect to health, work, and well-being are slowly breaking down. The Mercury influence here says that our ideas as a collective and individually about the concepts of healthcare, work, and well-being, those of Virgo, those structures that enshrine, that enforce, and codify collective beliefs, they are all dissolving slowly. Fortunately for us, Saturn is also the archetype of time. So we know that this process of dissolution of these domains of healthcare, work, and well-being will break down slowly but surely between March 12, 2025, when he first entered into Pisces, and March 2028. Now, it takes a little longer for Saturn to move through Pisces because Pisces has 40-odd degrees in the 13 sign system. That is, it takes the sun about 40 days to transit through the sign. So therefore, it takes longer than the normal 2 years, which most people ascribe to Saturn. Transits have been 2 years. This one is in fact closer to 3 years. So over that time frame, those structures and systems linked to Saturn are going to break down as he moves through Pisces. What that all means for us is a period of great change, heightened and triggered by this partial solar eclipse, this new moon. So therefore, given the presence of Mercury, this is about our mindset and our beliefs about the domains of Virgo, work, health, and well-being. And it is about the structures and institutions that we rely on and that we've come to rely on to manage healthcare, workplace relations, human resources, employment law, occupational health and safety. The Pluto influence is that we are being confronted individually and collectively, particularly through this 2025 to 2028 period of Saturn's transit through Pisces. We are being confronted by powerful forces that oversee those domains of employment and healthcare, which are Virgo domains. The Uranian influence here is also very interesting and very topical, and we spent quite a bit of time talking about this before we came online. Technologies that enable productivity gains, such as AI, automation, and robotics, are the domain of the Uranian disruption. It won't happen all at once, but they are definitely, that genie is out of the bottle, as we said earlier. The Mercury influence is about data collection. And that, to me, talks about when you blend all of this together with the Uranian influence, the Pluto influence, the Saturn influence, the Mercury influence, the partial solar eclipse, and the presence of Neptune. So there's a lot of energies going on here. But to cut through all of that, we need to focus on data collection, data mining, and the technologies that track our health, that provide us with biofeedback, that interact with the healthcare system. That is a big piece of this, and understanding that we need to be very conscious and very aware of what's going on in terms of data meets healthcare at this particular time.
Yeah, and as we were speaking about it beforehand, it's a lot of people are still relying on the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. And I would like us all to take the agency and the responsibility to make sure that we do not fall off that cliff. And, think about the food you're consuming, the water you are drinking. Um, when you have an upset system in your body, whether it's a infection or something different, do you straight away go for the antibiotics that are prescribed by your doctor, or do you go, can I try something different, or can I do things in my life now to help my body not get to that stage? And you could use certain biofeedback, but where does that information go? And I'm curious to see if we're going to talk about that more later on. So this Virgo, as I said, I am a Virgo sun. It's an interesting time for me to really, as I'm getting older, am I looking after this vessel right now? Have I got everything in place? And have I got systems in place to lower my stress levels as well? Because stress is such a big part of how our physical body reacts. And so for me, to reduce the stress in my life is I plan, and we do one weekly shop, and I plan out what we're having for dinner every night, what the lunches are going to be, and I do a lot of meal prepping, because if I do that, I can be a better mum when my children need my presence. And so by just putting my head down for a couple of hours on a Sunday, and I do a lot of meal prep in the mornings. This might sound really crazy for some people, like I'm too busy in the morning, but for me, the afternoons, I want to be so focused on my children, and it's nice to be able to go wander for 2 hours and come home, and dinner is pretty much done. There's no extra stress. And my message to you listening is stress, if we can reduce that in just some aspects of your life, I think our health and well-being will improve a lot more. And so talking about these things, what works for me might work for you, or David, you might have some tips that have helped you reduce the overall stress in your life. And by communicating that, using the Mercury energy to have a good conversation about that to help each other move forward. You have mentioned, and as I have mentioned as well, this is a partial solar eclipse, so there's going to be some extra energies happening. So the sun and moon are conjunct in Virgo at 4 degrees. So this partial solar eclipse, what does it have in store for us?
This, of course, is the second eclipse, and they generally come in pairs. So we just had the lunar eclipse a couple of weeks ago, and now we're having the solar eclipse, or partial solar eclipse. But generally, what they represent, again, in the astrological interpretations broadly, we're talking here about amplifying new moon energies. And you've always got to think about, but in what context? Well, the context is the sign in which it is happening, which is Virgo, which for us is the sign of work, health, and well-being. And of course, work and health are so intimately related to well-being. You just talked about stress and stressors. And yeah, that is absolutely part of the theme coming through on both an individual and a collective level. The collective dealing with stress falls back on the healthcare system, which is why I talk about that. And within the workplace, stress is often dealt with through those Saturnian structures of, standard operating procedures, HR manuals, codes of conduct, all of that kind of Saturnian codification. So you've got these very interesting triggers going on physically through this partial solar eclipse, but you've also got these this consideration about the structures and the beliefs and the systems that we wrap around that when things don't go well for us in our bodies, when our well-being is affected, when our work becomes stressful, when our health begins to deteriorate. There are always systems and processes that we go to, whatever they are. So generally, though, under a solar eclipse, we have to expect the unexpected on both a personal level and a collective level. To get some sense of the cyclical nature of this, go back about 19 years. So we're talking 2006. So pretty easy to map back and cast your mind back to where you were, what you were doing, what was happening for you at that time, because some of that is coming back into fruition, into awareness now. This is definitely, obviously, new moons, but amplified by the solar eclipse is a time of beginnings and endings. I mean, they are one and the same, even though they're different words. You can't have an ending without a beginning, or a beginning without an ending, really, in the sense of time. So it is an opportunity to set powerful intentions. That's a key with this, and it's amplified because of the solar eclipse energy. We can set the stage for new paths. We can let go of what no longer serves us. This expectation that anything can happen it has sometimes a sense of fate about it. And we can look back, and that's why I say 2006, maybe something happened for you, which was a major turning point. But generally what will happen, and the effects of these solar eclipses can be 3 to 6 months out. So we're talking again September, we're talking through to December, maybe even as long as March next year, depending on what else is going on in the charts, personally and collectively. So these effects may not show up straight away, but we might look back in 2 months, 3 months time and go, wow, that was a major turning point for me. And that I got pushed outside of my comfort zone, and I didn't really see it coming, but I'm glad that it happened. So expect triggering events that force upon us change. These events can be chaotic or disruptive, but again, that all comes back to our mindset. And it's ultimately, if we have an attitude of gratitude towards disruption, towards these that being pushed out of the nest, as it were, or outside of our comfort zone, we can see it as a opportunity for development, as a gift, if you like, from the cosmos, from our higher self, from our guides, or just simply that this was fated to happen at this particular time. So we need to be set up for it. And this is why we're talking about it through this interpretation and podcast today. Now, with respect to work, it is true that regardless of whether we exchange hours for dollars, or whether we do voluntary work, or whether we do unpaid work or charitable work, we are exchanging time for something in response, in exchange for usually money, but it might be praise, it might be recognition, it might be a sense of fulfillment. So work provides for most of us a sense of fulfillment. That concept is particularly important when you mentioned stress before, because yes, work can provide a sense of fulfillment and meaning in our lives, and can kind of give us direction to go in, but not everyone's happy. And we were talking about that the other day, that there are lots and lots of big surveys out there that say that, sometimes as many as half of people in employment situations are actually unhappy, which is incredible, really. So at this time, and as I said, these eclipses can last 3 months up to 6 months, and things can appear immediately, or they may be a little slower. But that which has been hidden may well be revealed. But remember that the revelation will come through our minds. And we know that because of the mercurial energy here. Of course, Virgo's guardian is Mercury, and Mercury is conjunct to this partial solar eclipse. So these revelations, these insights, this awareness, these aha moments, these eureka moments when you join the dots are going to happen intellectually. They're going to happen through our mind. They're going to happen through the lens of I realize something because I'm thinking about it, and the feelings will follow that. So we're not talking about some spiritual revelations. We're talking about mental growth. We're talking about awareness that comes through the mind. We are going to get, or there will be an opportunity for a cosmic push that will expand our awareness. And again, in the context of Virgo energy. So this might highlight those limitations that we have at work, including a lack of meaning. So for some, this might be interpreted as an opportunity to go look for another job or find another job or do something different. It might result in a promotion, or it might result in something even more dramatic than that. But these limitations at work or limitations within our health or well-being, and constraints, impediments, things that are holding us back. Often that's a mindset. Often that is to do with a lack of discipline or a lack of habit or a lack of awareness. So we need to engage our critical thinking. One of the things I do when I get sick is I try to think about what might be the metaphysical trigger here. What might be happening in my life that I'm not paying attention to? Yes, it might just be a simple, I caught a bug, but it may be something a little deeper than that. And generally, that's where we're getting to with these types of solar eclipse energies, is thinking a little deeper, thinking beneath the surface. So we are looking for clarity being a key word. And finally, my comment about this solar eclipse and the mercurial energy of it and the mindset energy of it is that manifestation is well served at this particular point in time if it is grounded in goal setting, prioritization, and importantly, follow through. So, not paralysis by analysis, not endless navel gazing. That's having a plan and following through and taking the steps to concretize that or manifest that in the real world. That's the Virgo energy or the energy of the earth.
It's definitely something I'm still working on, following through. What you were saying about that Mercury energy and how it's thinking. For me also, it is having the conversations with, and we've come in this strange time for me is where we just talk to people that think the same as us, and you are finding people in your echo chamber, and you all like tomato ketchup and not mayonnaise, for example. Um, but maybe mayonnaise has certain health benefits. I'm just making this up, right? Health benefits because it has blah blah. And if you keep that information to you because you're like, oh, they don't want to know. For example, there's someone that I work with. It's a young lad, um, maybe has never really taken antibiotics in his life, but he was not aware that if you are prescribed something like that, then you can't just willy-nilly going, oh, it says 4 times a day, but I'll just do two and I'll leave it here over the weekend and I don't really care. It's like, no. No, I have the knowledge that if you are prescribed something like that, you need to follow through. And so there is a time and place where if you have the knowledge, share that with your neighbor, with your friend, or even with your enemy because you want to help. And I think the more we are spreading the knowledge that we have in a nice, productive way, we could be conquering mountains together. And for me, that is so important that we come together because, David, you are very knowledgeable in certain things, and I'm very knowledgeable in others. And by coming together, we are just a power couple. And I think if we do that, then we can move forward and we can set these goals and follow through together. I will definitely be pulling on you to help me assist with that. So thank you in advance. We spoke about this beautiful grand trine with Uranus and Pluto. So the new moon sitting at in Virgo is making the first trine with Uranus sitting at 7 degrees Taurus. So how is that playing out?
Yeah, Uranian energy, very interesting because it's so elusive, so tricky, and unpredictable. Um, there's two sides. When we were talking about this and I were reflecting on how to interpret the position of Uranus here with the solar eclipse, we've already touched on the fact that a solar eclipse, partial or full, doesn't really matter. The solar eclipse energy is that of disruption, and that is actually amplified by the trine to Uranus, but in a positive way. But I kind of looked at this and broke it down into this sort of two ways of looking at this. There's the big picture disruption, and then there's the personal disruption. So let's start with a big picture of how the Uranian energy may manifest in this next sort of 3 to 6 months. The vector or the pathway or the channel, if you like, for Uranian energies to manifest in an Earth context. We're talking about an Earth sign, so Uranus is in Taurus and Virgo is a Earth sign. They're both Earth signs, so we're definitely talking about physical manifestation as opposed to spiritual or emotional. This is physically, can be grasped, can be touched, can be sensed. It's very real. So the Uranian expression in that context with all of this earth energy, its pathway, its channel, for it to come through to us, I believe is technology. And specifically, again, how did I arrive at that? The technologies relating to healthcare, relating to the workplace, relating to well-being, and the technologies that could be the disruption, the disruptive influence for those areas of Virgo are AI, are automation, and robotics. Now, these technologies, individually and collectively, are disruptive to work, they are disruptive to healthcare, and they can be either disruptive positively or negatively to our well-being. Uranus and Taurus is a physical manifestation, and I've touched on that. So it's very, just to be clear, this is when we talk about those modalities of fire, earth, ether, water, air, we know that earth expresses in the body and it expresses in our environment and that which is around us, right? So we know that. So Uranus is also the guardian of the 11th house of Aquarius. So any of his energies is awakening energy to a new zeitgeist, a new esprit de corps, if you like, for the collective. Everyone knows by now, I suppose, they'd have some ideas about the age of Aquarius and the age of Pisces. The age of Pisces being patriarchal, top-down, apex control, whereas the age of Aquarius is more collective, ground up, groundswell. But there are, for those transitions between the ages to take place, this is where Uranus plays such an interesting role. There has to be some kind of vector or channel through which that metaphorical lightning can strike. Otherwise, it just, a lightning strike out in the field doesn't make any difference. But if it strikes at the edifices or the power structures of Pluto or the edifices or the towers of Saturn, we're absolutely going to know about it, especially if it's happening in those areas of work, healthcare, and well-being. And it's coming through those technologies of AI, automation, and robotics. Now, the darker side of the big picture here of Aquarian energy and those technologies is that the architects, and we were talking about that before with the Sam Altman and the OpenAI, the architects of change, and there's a few of them, but not many, are laying the foundation for humanity's future. Now, it's very interesting just to dwell on that. There is a few people on this planet with enormous power, Pluto, an Aquarian energy disruption, who are laying the rails, putting in place the foundation for humanity's future. We talked about the industrial revolutions. The previous industrial revolution, the rails was that in manufacturing and production and efficiencies in production and extraction of resources and then turning that into things and widgets that we can use. Well, this new industrial revolution is about the digital world. So we need to be aware that there are a bunch of architects and we don't know what their motivations are. These designers, these systems thinkers, these so-called Aquarians, are creating the technology platforms for change. This is the Uranian strike that we need to be aware of. And they are focusing very much on the domains of Virgo, which is work, healthcare, and well-being. So the Uranus trine to Pluto, we'll do a little bit more of a deep dive into Pluto in a moment, but I'll just touch on this piece now, is that with all of this change going on in the background, and I'm not saying that that's happening in the next 3 to 6 months, but it could well accelerate over that period, prompted by this cosmic alignment with the solar eclipse. There's also this trine with Pluto, which gives us the signal, the idea, the concept, the prompt, the push, if you like, cosmically, to confront the power structures of Pluto and the dark intentions of these designers, systems thinkers, and architects of change, because some of what they're doing is very destructive. There are destructive as well as constructive elements of AI, automation, and robotics. And we need to, Mercury, talk about, analyze, and communicate what we are finding about these technologies and these vast changes that are taking place in the areas of work, healthcare, and well-being. The Uranian influence here can also be, if that's the big picture, that can also be interpreted individually and help us to propel and accelerate our mind-body awareness, to quicken our knowledge and understanding of health, of alternative remedies, of where allopathic medicine works and where it doesn't work, where the metaphysical influences on our health, as I touched on before, the emotional and spiritual influences, in other words, the bigger picture about our healthcare. Also, we get to think about, with the Uranian influence here on a personal level, and I touched on this before, how and in what way do we derive meaning and purpose from work? And in what way does that affect and impact our lifestyles and our health? See, the things are all linked. Work, health, and well-being, the domains of Virgo, cannot be separated. And yet the Uranian influence here actually acts as a separator. And in doing so, in disrupting what appears to be a sort of a cohesive area of concepts of Virgo, can actually be disaggregated and broken apart to see the interrelationships between those pieces and to figure out, okay, so this links to that and that links to that and that doesn't link to that. But if I do this here, if I push here, I might get this gain there. If I pull back here, I might get a gain over there. That's the sort of thinking, the Mercury thinking that's required at this time with the Uranian influence in the background for us to focus on.
And I think the whole Pisces period, the patriarchal way of we top down, we have to work for someone, we have to earn the money to buy the things because the things will make me happy. We as a society are being kept so busy, and we have to keep up with the Joneses. We have to have the latest smartphone, the biggest TV, the this, that, and the other thing. But and then we have that, and then we are being so busy with watching the latest show on Netflix or Prime or whatever, but we don't take time out to have a conversation with our teenage daughter and talk about how do we best prepare for your body to become a young woman? How do we, as a woman at perimenopause, how do I best prepare my body now so that in 20 years' time I can still walk in the national parks and keep up with my children and perhaps grandchildren? We are no longer, well, I shouldn't say that, but there's a lot of us that are not having those conversations by not sharing that knowledge. And just going to work and work 8 to 10 hours a day or longer and then come home and have food that wasn't prepared with love. Was there good intentions put in that food, or we're just quickly eating it down while scrolling social media? So it's stress, 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 all putting on this physical body. It's exhausting. And I mean, I've been there, done that, and I definitely feel days where I have given my energy in a place where I'm not being fulfilled, but I am not yet in a position to say I no longer need to do that. So for me, it's a battle as well. And I think by having that conversation, by stepping out, by doing sound bowl healings, by meditating, getting back to kind of that middle ground of having those conversations is important. And you've mentioned that, of course, we have Taurus as an earth sign, Virgo is an earth sign, but this last one that we'll talk about, Pluto being in Capricorn, is also an earth sign. So we've got a lot of physical, earthly things happening. So another trine with Pluto, who is sitting at 1 degree Capricorn. How does this, and it's not a tension, right? It's a trine. So how does this friendly relationship between these planetary bodies play out?
Yeah, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head. These are positive tailwinds. You know, if we look at trines as tailwinds, squares, oppositions, conjunctions as headwinds, then we're in a time of a beneficial time. The cosmos, the way that the astrological alignments are working right now, and of course the wheel of time turns, and that's why I mentioned that we know absolutely categorically that this dissolution of these Saturnian systems linked to healthcare, linked to workplace practices, HR and employment law, all of that stuff, occupational safety and health, all of these domains, these structures that are built around work, and the structures that are built around healthcare, and therefore our well-being and how we manage ourselves, our work-life balance, all of that. This process is slowish. It's not super fast. The awareness may come to us like, wow, I've just heard something, seen something, or seen anew with fresh eyes during the solar eclipse period. But the process of Saturn moving through Pisces of dissolution is going to take until March 2028. So there is time, but it's not endless time. And that's also adds to the idea that earth energies, yep, they can be struck by an earthquake and something can happen that's very dramatic, but earth by nature moves moves a bit more slowly. So there is time to absorb and adapt and move with these changes, but don't delay too long. But the Pluto power, if Uranian energy is lightning, then the Pluto is the power relating to what it strikes. That's how I look at it. That the Pluto power, again, I keep reinforcing that all of this is in the context of just those areas of work, health, and well-being, the domains of Virgo. That's this whole podcast, this whole solar eclipse begins and ends with those three areas. And it is so amplified and emphasized here because of the Mercury conjunction and Mercury's rulership or guardianship of Virgo. So we've almost got a double Mercury, so a double thinking energy coming through as an overlay here. This is about thinking, not so much feeling, not so much musing, not so much creating. It's about thinking about these things. And specifically, if we're talking about that Virgo precision, we need to think about, to critically assess, to investigate, to analyze the areas of work, health, and well-being. And the Pluto influence here is the power structures that are behind these areas. So let me explain a little more about that. The key or the link is not just to think, but to communicate as well. That's Mercury energy. But there's an opportunity because of the trine in a fairly benign way to confront oppressive power as it presents itself for us in the domains of work and particularly healthcare, the system of healthcare, that is. We need to acknowledge, to debate, and to discuss the impacts of that Uranian influence of AI, of robotics and automation, which is disrupting work and healthcare systems. Work, productivity, displacement that comes from AI and robotics, redundancy, retraining, these are all ideas of Pluto power, upskilling and those who need to move with the times. We need to understand the institutions, the powerful structures that provide healthcare. And we need to understand that they may and probably are, for most of us, failing, that they're outdated, and that they're due desperately for renewal, for transformation and regeneration. That we need to ask ourselves when confronting those Pluto power structures, what role will I or we play? We remember, as you said before, that this is a trine, so therefore it's a positive, uplifting opportunity. And doors right now are open to debate these complex issues of how AI, robotics, and automation, the Uranian energies, will disrupt the fields of Virgo, of healthcare, of work, and of well-being. These institutions and structures that oversee human resources, hiring and firing, codes of conduct, the processes to manage misbehavior at work. You and I were having a long conversation about that for your workplace with somebody. Employment law, occupational health and safety, the ideas and concepts and power structures around injury rehabilitation. Here in New Zealand, we have a system called the ACC, Accident Compensation Corporation, which is a huge insurance company, but most sort of employers in the Western world at least pay some kind of premium to an outsourced insurance company that looks after workplace rehabilitation. That's the sort of power structure I'm talking about here, right? What happens when restitution and compensation for workplace accidents and injury? What about those processes there? There's a whole bunch of them. I can't go into them all, but you get the idea that there are power structures, Saturn and Pluto together, that absolutely are wrapped around all of those ideas or sort of core concepts of Virgo, which is work, health, and well-being. There's these big edifices and pieces that are sitting there that are very slow moving by nature and often very resistant to change too. And there are management and governance structures. There are chains of command. There are hierarchies. And we have to that control healthcare, that control workplace practices, that control even the workplace that we're involved in. Depending on whether you work for a small business or a big business, there's definitely a chain of command there. So are those chains of command, those power structures, are those hierarchies, are those systems, are they accountable to us as individuals? Ultimately, most of the time they're funded by taxes, by the way. But are they accountable to us? Are they delivering on our expectations? How transparent are they? And what are the motivations and drives of the individuals who sit in authority positions within these structures as well? All of that is wrapped up in this power Pluto piece of this kind of solar eclipse. So again, thinking about all of those bits, how they link together, how they may not link together, how they may be dysfunction, how they may be supportive or destructive or constructive. Who knows? But it takes us thinking about it to start to have some discussions and debates about these areas.
And what might work for one person might not work for another. And I think sharing those thoughts, that's the number one. You can't just keep thinking about it and in your mind go, oh, my boss shouldn't, blah, blah, blah. Like if you don't open your mouth and if you don't share how you think you can improve your workplace, it could be as simple as the kitchen is messy every day. How about we make a roster and at 4 o'clock on Monday it's Mary, on Tuesday it's Gary, and that person does the dishes for half an hour, and then you all take up the slack. So if you have an idea like that and you're not in management, use this time now to share your thoughts and communicate it in a way. And if you're not good at talking, maybe write down a bullet point list and give it, or in a text message or whatever, and share it, or talk to your HR, or not HR, but your coordinator, and share the burden together if you're really freaked out by this leadership person, because it can be scary if you are a 17-year-old and this is your first job and you're like, who am I? I shouldn't be raising these things, but you might just have that thought and you can see the solution. share it with those around you. I'm excited for change. It could be scary at times, but I'm excited for the change nonetheless. So the Saturnian structures, let's talk about those. So Saturn and Neptune are sitting on the other side of this new moon partial solar eclipse. Saturn is sitting at 6 degrees Pisces, and at 8 degrees Pisces is in Neptune. So how are these energies coming with this opposition, so this difficult relationship at this new moon?
Yeah, so yeah, as you touched on the Saturnian piece, Saturn and Pluto are very closely linked here, but they're slightly different in their emphasis. So the Saturnian structures, Saturn, let's take a step back. Saturn is the solidification, the codification, the enshrining or the inculcation, or how ideas are fixed, how they're framed up and fixed into usually systems and processes and operating procedures, that sort of thing. So those fixes, that solidification, if you like, or codification of ideas around work and healthcare and well-being. Of course, well-being is very important in the workplace. That's why drivers of trucks are only allowed to drive for a certain number of hours, and there's all sorts of things going on that's about our well-being, and we have to have some time off and a certain amount of leave per year and so on and so forth. So there's a whole bunch of stuff. But those systems and processes in and of themselves, while they may be Saturnian, they have no power unless we give them power. So that's the piece about Saturn, is that sometimes these structures were put in place with the best of intentions, Saturn, but they've outgrown or their usefulness, or they've gone past their use by date, or have grown into a massive beast of a thing that actually needs to be challenged. And that challenge starts through thinking about it, Mercury, and analyzing it with that Virgo energy and being a little discerning about, is this actually working for us? Is it working for my workplace? Is it working for me individually? But the Saturnian structures are ultimately this coming together of beliefs and ideas that we have about work, about healthcare, and about well-being. So the manifestation of Saturnian structures, as I've just touched on, is basically rules, processes, standard operating procedures of what some people call SOPs, laws, regulations. All of these Saturnian structures act, or are supposed to act, as guides for us to help us think the right way, or see the right way, or follow the right process so that we get a predictable outcome or a known outcome. Or they can also serve as guardrails, but they can, as much as they're guardrails, they can also be like prisons for us, right? So depending on, last time a Saturnian system or structure was examined might have been 10 or 15 years ago, and it may well be time to have another look at that particular thing, right? So these Saturnian structures direct our energy and our attention. They focus our minds. They focus how we work. The idea of silos and operating, this is my stay in my lanes, a classic Saturnian sort of manifestation of these rules, right? So healthcare and well-being also, it's not just work, it's healthcare and well-being too. But Saturn and Pisces, as I touched on before, are that these types of structures are slowly dissolving, and they will be turned on their heads one way or another by around about March 2028. We're going to see some pretty significant changes across the planet, I would think, in the way that work and healthcare particularly is structured. And a lot of that is going to become very real for all of us because of those vectors of Uranian energy, which are AI, robotics, and automation. Whether we like it or not, whether we have our heads stuck in the sand, whether we want to, the Neptunian energy I talked about before is that, oh, I don't want to know. That's that whole Urine delusion about how these things are going to change the Saturnian structures, the rules, the processes, and the power structures of Pluto. Make no mistake, even if we do bury our heads in the sand and we therefore invoke the shadow aspects of Neptune, which is to turn away, to shy away, to not confront, to just be to practice escapism, that there will come and bite us in the bum. So it's better to confront these things. So what has worked in the past with Saturn may not work in the future. That's a bit of a mantra. From a personal perspective, the Saturnian energy here is, and the Mercury energy and the solar eclipse energy as well, is about developing awareness that the systems and structures that are helpful, that are advantageous to help us with work, with healthcare and well-being, they should stay. If they're working, keep them. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. But at the same time, there are systems and structures that are not helping us. They are disadvantageous for work. They are putting sand in the gears, dust in the system, grit in the system, and friction in the system in the areas of work, healthcare, and well-being. So there's lots of different pieces to this and different angles to look. You see, AI, robotics, and automation is the functionality that is being touted these days as the way to help us be individually and collectively more productive, more effective, more efficient in our work. And we can deal with health issues, the way that we deal with health issues through the diagnosis process, the root causes of disease process. Some of those structures, some of those ideas are going to be turned on their heads. So, we need to be open to all of this. Where these systems and structures, Saturnian energies, are not helpful to us, they are destructive, they are working against our best interests, individually or collectively, and that, of course, is sometimes that's just a perception, or sometimes it might be an idea that takes hold, but it can't take hold unless we're talking about it, can it? But where these systems and structures are not helpful, we need to communicate, and we need to do that with our eyes open. The thing about Mercury energy, and you and I have talked about this a lot, is that it's quite rational, and it's an air sign, so therefore there's not a lot of room for emotion sometimes, and there is a place for that. I mean, obviously there's a place for emotion and heart and that. It does have a place at the table, but often when it comes to Saturnian structures and Pluto power, we need to actually be very rational and just see it for what it is and not get swept up in the emotion. So this is very much in that rational, critical thinking approach to these problems. The solar eclipse energy brings our focus, our mental focus, to these systems and structures that may need to be reset, they may need to be recalibrated. So the Uranian energy says we need to be open to ideas that might come to us. We might read something, hear something, see something, sense something. Those ideas could come from anywhere. Be open to them and be open to applying them, as you say, to where you work, to healthcare, to be open to change and innovation within those domains. And if you're in a management or an executive function in the workplace area, the industry of HR, and the healthcare system, it's a call out for you from the cosmos to be very focused on strategically thinking about operational efficiencies, restructures, reorganizations. You see, this is what these executives are going to have to start to think about. If we bring in automation to our workplace, or if we bring in AI to healthcare, what is that going to do to the customer experience? What is that going to do to people who have come to rely on those systems? What is that going to do to people who are not technologically savvy? See, these are very important questions to ask, right? There's all good about the upside and the productivity gains and the efficiency and the effectiveness, which are absolutely in the domain of Virgo. But what about the other side? What about the downside? What about the displaced workers? How is that going to work? So if you're an executive or you're in management or you're in a power structure, you have control over some of that. You need to be thinking very strategically before you implement some of these technologies. The involvement of AI, robotics, and automation into the workplace and healthcare systems, the Mercury mind is asking us to think critically about disruptive change. And the Pluto energies is about transformation and transition systems and structures. In other words, change management. It's actually a process there. We need to test and learn. We need to be agile in our thinking, to experiment with change. A change can be incremental, it can be radical, it can be evolution, it can be revolution, or it could just be, look, we've looked at that, it's okay, we're going to leave the status quo. And finally, if you're an entrepreneur or you've got an entrepreneurial spirit, you are very, very favored at this time under the Uranian energy, because it is you. And entrepreneurs or intrapreneurs, if you're working inside an organization, or entrepreneurs if you're outside these corporate structures, these governance structures, these Saturnian structures, for you, for the entrepreneurial minded people, this is a fantastic opportunity to spot opportunities to disrupt the incumbents, those dinosaurs and legacy systems, with AI, with robotics and automation. It's certainly something I'm looking at in the finance industry, how I can disrupt. And I'm looking at those demographic changes. And we talked before about that. There are a lot of institutional knowledge that is held in the minds of these 50 to 60 to 65-year-olds who didn't come through the careers with automation, with digitization, with what we're experiencing today in the workplace. So they've got a lot of their knowledge in their minds, and that is also part of the Saturnian structures, the Saturnian institutional knowledge. Some of it's actually up here. So how does that get downloaded, if you like, into the collective commons? Because as some of these people leave the workforces, and I'm sure that there's some of you out there listening to this are in this situation, you've got a manager or somebody who's an expert, a subject matter expert, and suddenly they retire and you realize, oh my goodness, I don't know how on earth to really do that or to solve that problem. That's a Saturnian energy right there, because all of that knowledge was locked up and inculcated or fixed in that one individual. So we need to think about, how do we download that collective institutional knowledge for the collective commons, which is the Aquarian energy, so that it doesn't disappear out the door. And your entrepreneurs out there that might be thinking about, well, I've got an idea to start to do a startup or something like that. It's also this time, this next 3 to 6 months particularly, is very favorable to get that going.
Imagine that we get all these comments like, oh, I comments on a video in Spotify, like, oh, I put my idea into practice because I communicated my thoughts with such and such. I'm excited to see what we might have put in people's minds to move forward by communicating the way that we interpret the planetary bodies. Of course, we use the true location of the sun, moon, and all the others. If you use any app, it will show you that Pluto is at the very early stages of Capricorn, that Saturn is very much in Pisces, as is Neptune. So use true knowledge and then spread it to anyone and everyone that is ready to listen, because some of us are head in sand kind of approach. But I think there is definitely a change. This has been a full-on energetic week, but it is a beautiful grand trine, positive energies, tailwinds pushing us forward. And I think it is up to us individually to take that step, to take that action and be ready to have those quick insights of Uranus to then physically move on with it. So thank you, David, so much for sharing your interpretation. If you're watching to us on YouTube, you can find us also on Spotify and Apple Podcast and Audible. If you're listening on the go, but you want to go back and see all our videos, because all our content is on YouTube, go there. You can flick us an email, you can get a chat or a reading. And I am excited to see how this partial solar eclipse shapes all of us. Thank you so much, David.
Namaste.
Namahi. Until next time.